Hi everyone, tonight we're going to do something a little reckless. Imagine it's late at night, your street is quiet, and you're listening to someone on the internet talking about haunted houses, while you're probably lying in bed with the lights off. Brave move. Some people would say you won't survive the night just from listening to this story, but hey, I'm not here to scare you. Okay, maybe I am. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And of course, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? I love knowing whether you're in the middle of the day being bold, or if it's 3 a.m. and you've just decided sleep is optional. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft background music, and let's get started tonight. The story begins with a family arriving at an ancient house at the edge of a forgotten town. The house was massive, built with dark timber that had weathered centuries of storms, and its roof sagged like a tired old man who had seen too much. The air smelled of damp earth, moss, and something metallic, like rust or blood, depending on your imagination. They pulled up in an old van, its engine coughing before dying in front of the gate. The gate itself leaned crookedly, its iron hinges covered in thick orange rust, but it opened with surprising ease, almost as if the house had been waiting for them. That's the first sign, right? When a place feels too ready to receive you, the parents told themselves they had made a good deal. Houses this size don't come cheap, unless there's a reason, but they didn't talk about the price out loud. They didn't talk about the neighbors warning them not to move in, and they definitely didn't talk about the 3 families before them who never stayed more than a month. The children, full of excitement, ran toward the porch, their footsteps echoing on the rotten boards, but something strange happened. Their laughter seemed muted, as if swallowed by the walls before it could spread. Even sound didn't want to live there. Inside, the house was darker than expected, though it was still daytime. The windows were tall and narrow, their glass wavy with age, distorting the sunlight into weak ribbons. Dust floated like a fine mist in the air, stirred up by their arrival. The air was cold, and naturally cold, as if the fireplace had never known flame. That night, as they unpacked, the family noticed little details. A chair rocking slightly in a corner, though no one had touched it. A door upstairs creaking open, revealing an empty hallway. A sudden thud, as though something heavy had fallen in the attic, but when they checked, the attic door was sealed shut with nails older than anyone alive. Still, they laughed it off. Houses settle, old wood groans. At least, that's what they said. But the house seemed to enjoy those excuses, as if it wanted them to underestimate it. One impossible story floated through the town, passed quietly between locals. They said the house was once a resting place for travelers who never checked out. Some claimed a preacher lived there 2 centuries ago, welcoming the poor and the lost, but that those who entered often vanished, leaving behind only their shoes on the porch. Another story told of a woman who wove red cloth by candlelight, waiting for her husband to return from war. He never did, but neighbors swore her candle kept burning every night, long after she was gone. And the last story, a more recent one. A boy dared his friends to spend the night in the house. He walked in with a flashlight, laughing. The flashlight was found the next morning on the steps. The boy wasn't, but the new family didn't know these stories. Not yet. They were busy pretending everything was fine. As night came, they gathered in the kitchen to eat the first meal in their new home. The lights flickered, weak against the darkness, but they ignored it. They talked about painting the walls, fixing the floorboards, and maybe planting flowers outside. But under the table, one of the children swore they felt something brushing against their ankle, cold and slick, like the touch of a fish. When they looked, there was nothing, just shadows. Later, in the silence of night, each family member tried to sleep in their new rooms, but the silence wasn't complete. From the walls came faint noises, scratching, like tiny nails dragging across the wood, and whispers, too soft to understand, but too clear to dismiss. Here's where it gets weird. One of the children, the youngest, swore they saw a face in the wallpaper. Not just a shadow, not a trick of light, an actual face, pale, eyes closed, lips pressed tight, as if holding back a scream. The child blinked, and it was gone. But the wallpaper bulged slightly, as if breathing. The father woke in the middle of the night, gasping for air. He dreamed, or maybe didn't, of standing in the front yard, staring up at the windows of the house. And in every window, a figure stood watching him. Dozens of them, unmoving, silent. He woke drenched in sweat, but when he looked out the actual window, the yard was empty. The house was still by morning. The family tried to shake it off. The first night in any new place is strange, they told themselves. It takes time to adjust. But the truth, the house wasn't adjusting to them. It was already shaping itself around them, learning their sounds, their patterns, their weaknesses. Can you guys get out of this? Or are you already in too deep? And remember, this is only the arrival. The second evening crept in quicker than expected. It was one of those dusks that seemed to fall like a curtain, not gently shifting from day to night, but snapping into darkness the way a switch is thrown. The house, with its narrow windows and heavy shutters, seemed to welcome the night more than the day, almost as if it preferred the cover of shadows. By now, boxes were stacked along the hallway, the smell of cardboard and dust mixing with the old damp scent of the wood. The family busied themselves, trying to make the house feel normal. A lamp in the corner, a rug spread over the warped floorboards, a little music playing softly from a phone speaker. But all those comforts were swallowed whole by the strange acoustics of the place. Every sound bounced oddly, like the walls weren't just reflecting noise but bending it, reshaping it, twisting it. And then came the whispers. It started when the eldest child went upstairs to look for a missing book. Standing in the hallway, they froze, hearing what sounded like two people murmuring just around the corner. The words were too muffled to catch, too hushed to belong to anyone in the family downstairs. A soft, sibilant exchange, like secrets being shared in confidence. But when they turned the corner, the hall was empty. The door at the far end was closed, locked, and the whispers cut off instantly. Meanwhile, downstairs, the mother paused while unpacking dishes. She thought she heard her name called, not shouted, not spoken, but breathed, as if someone leaned close behind her and let the sound slip past her ear. She spun around so fast she nearly dropped a plate. No one was there. The rest of the family was in the living room, arguing over where the TV should go. Now, here's where it gets unsettling. The whispers weren't consistent. They came and went, but every time someone tried to listen carefully, they stopped, like children playing a cruel game of hide and seek. At one point, the youngest child began laughing at nothing. When asked why, they replied, "Because the wall told me a joke." Everyone chuckled nervously. Kids have wild imaginations, right? But the child's laugh didn't sound entirely normal. It was too high-pitched, almost echoing. Let me drop in an impossible story here, just for flavor. Some years back, a visitor to the house claimed they sat in the parlor and heard a conversation in perfect detail. A man and woman arguing over money, voices clear as day. They left immediately to fetch a witness, but when they returned, silence, no trace of anyone. The chairs were still rocking though, as if bodies had just vacated them seconds earlier. Another tale said a postman refused to deliver mail after dark because once, while sliding a letter through the slot, he heard someone whispering his childhood nickname. He never told anyone that name before. How could the house have known? That night, as the family settled in, the whispers became less shy. In the kitchen, while pouring water, the father heard his own voice calling from upstairs, asking him to come quick. He sprinted up the stairs, but his children were asleep, his wife brushing her teeth. Nobody had called him, nobody but the house. The weird detail that no one could ignore came around midnight. The whispers didn't just echo through the ear, they came from inside objects. A lamp, buzzing softly, began to carry words. The pipes in the bathroom whispered when the water wasn't running. Even the refrigerator motor hummed in a low, rhythmic chant. Each voice was different, but all spoke in the same tone. Coaxing, beckoning, almost playful. Sleep was nearly impossible. The family tossed and turned, blankets pulled up high, and in those restless hours, each of them heard things they didn't dare admit in the morning. The mother swore she heard the sound of scissors snipping right beside her bed. The father claimed he felt someone gently tug at his sleeve in the dark. One of the kids dreamed of standing in a crowded room filled with faceless people all whispering at once. Their words nothing but a sea of hissing noise. Can you guys get out of this? Or do you think the house already has its hooks in you? By the third night, the whispers grew bolder. They no longer waited for dusk. They followed footsteps down the hall. They teased from behind closed doors. And sometimes they seemed to answer questions that were never asked aloud. One final impossible story spread through town involved a group of pranksters who broke into the house late one evening. They joked loudly, trying to scare each other, until one of them swore he heard his dead grandmother whispering his name from upstairs. He ran out screaming, and the others followed, mocking him. But later, Every single one admitted hearing the same voice, saying the same name, at the same time. None of them ever went back. The family, of course, tried to ignore it all. That's the human way of surviving the first stages of a haunting. Pretend it isn't happening. But ignoring whispers only gives them more room to grow. And by the end of that week, the whispers would become something more. Something that no rug, no lamp, no music could cover up. For now, the house was simply warming up. By the third evening, the whispers had settled into the family's nerves like damp seeping into clothing. They no longer startled every time they heard them, though their laughter grew thinner, their smiles forced. Still, they clung to the illusion of normalcy, because what else could they do? Abandon the house after just a few days? Admit defeat to something they couldn't even prove was real? No, pride wouldn't let them. Pride in the fact that money doesn't grow on trees. That night, as the father carried a stack of boxes upstairs, he stopped at the end of the hall. A door he hadn't noticed before stood there, painted the same dark color as the wall. It was almost hidden, blending into the shadows. He frowned, setting the boxes down, and tried the handle. It rattled but didn't turn. Locked. When he mentioned it at dinner, the others grew quiet. Nobody remembered seeing that door before. Not while moving in, not while unpacking. It was as if the house had sprouted it overnight. The children, naturally, became obsessed with it. They whispered theories: treasure room, secret passage, maybe even a hidden bedroom. The mother dismissed it quickly, though her hands trembled as she stacked plates. She muttered something about contractors sealing rooms for safety, but her voice lacked conviction. The next morning, they searched the entire house for keys. The previous owners had left a rusty tin box full of old brass keys, each one corroded, none labeled. The children eagerly tried each key, giggling at the clicking sounds in the lock. None fit. The lock seemed to laugh at them, the metal teeth useless in its mouth. And here's the first impossible story of this chapter. Decades ago, a locksmith was called to that very door. He brought every tool, every trick, but the lock wouldn't yield. Frustrated, he returned the next day to try again, but the door was gone. Flat wall, no seams, no hinges, no proof it had ever existed. When he told the owner, the man simply smiled and said, "You're lucky. It doesn't appear for everyone." That detail didn't comfort anyone. Later that evening, the eldest child placed an ear against the wood. Cold radiated through it, so sharp it burned. From within, there was a sound of faint scratching, like fingernails dragging across stone. They jerked back wide-eyed, swearing they heard breathing on the other side. When they told the parents, the father snapped at them to stop making things up. But his denial was too loud, too desperate. The weird detail came soon after. The family dog refused to go near the door. Every time they carried him upstairs, he growled low in his throat, his fur bristling, eyes fixed on that spot. Once, he even urinated on the carpet in fear rather than approach. No matter how much they coaxed, bribed, or dragged, the animal resisted with a primal terror no human excuse could erase that. At night, things escalated. The door rattled, just faintly, but enough to wake the light sleepers. A soft vibration, like someone testing it from the inside. The youngest child swore they heard a woman's voice humming from behind it. Not words, just a melody, low and mournful, slipping through the cracks like smoke. And of course, someone had to try knocking. The father, stubborn as always, tapped 3 times against the wood one sleepless night. He expected silence. Instead, there was a pause, and then 3 knocks back, perfectly matched. Let me slide in another impossible story here. Locals once whispered that during a thunderstorm, lightning struck the house, and for a moment the door blew open. Those who claimed to see inside said the room was not a room at all, but a forest of crooked black trees, swaying in a wind that didn't belong to this world. One man who stared too long was blinded. The others never spoke of it again. By now, the family avoided the upstairs at night. They gathered in the living room, huddling together under blankets, pretending it was fun, a family sleepover. But the truth was obvious. The door had changed something in the house. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a promise. And the house was patient. The third impossible story came from a maid who once worked there, long before the current family. She swore that she opened the door while cleaning, though no one else ever could. Inside, she found a perfectly preserved bedroom, candles lit, sheets neat, a mirror gleaming on the vanity. In the mirror, she saw herself, older by decades, eyes hollow, face gaunt. She slammed the door and fled, never to return. When others checked, the door was locked again. Can you guys get out of this? Or do you already feel like the house is pulling you closer to that locked door? The whispers were bad enough, but a locked door, especially one that shouldn't exist, was something else entirely. Something the house wanted them to notice. Something it needed them to open. And the longer it stayed shut, the hungrier the house seemed to become. By the fourth night, exhaustion began to hollow the family out. They moved slower, spoke less, and their eyes carried the heavy haze of sleeplessness. Coffee cups lined the kitchen counter like little shields, but no amount of caffeine could erase the bone-deep unease that grew with every hour inside the house. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. It wasn't just the locked door. Now, the shadows themselves began to play. It started innocently enough, as innocently as anything can in a place like this. The youngest child swore they saw someone standing at the far end of the hallway, just past the locked door. A tall, thin silhouette. At first, the parents dismissed it. Shadows shift, lights flicker, imagination fills in blanks. But then, one night, the mother herself caught sight of something moving in the corner of her eye. A figure, upright, human-shaped. When she turned, there was nothing there, just empty hall. Soon, they all saw it. The shadows weren't just flickering tricks of light, they lingered. They bent in strange ways, and they always seemed to stand just at the edge of vision, waiting to vanish when looked at directly. Here's the first impossible story of this chapter. A guest once stayed in the house for only a single night. In the morning, he told the owner he had counted 5 shadows in the upstairs hall. That wouldn't have been strange, except there were no people there to cast them, just outlines moving on the walls, swaying like curtains in a wind that never touched his skin. He left without breakfast, vowing never to step inside again. The father tried to rationalize. Old wood, weird wiring. It's nothing. But his voice cracked when he said it, and the others knew he didn't believe his own words. The weird detail came during dinner. As they ate, the overhead light flickered once, then twice, and in that brief strobe, they all saw their own shadows stretched impossibly long, curling across the table and up the walls like reaching hands. When the light steadied, everything looked normal again, but no one touched their food after that. That night, the eldest child couldn't sleep. They got up to fetch water, the old floorboards groaning under their feet. Halfway down the hall, they froze. Ahead, near the locked door, a shadow moved. Not on the wall, but in midair, darker than the surrounding night. It pulsed once, like it was breathing. Then it darted across the hall and disappeared. The child's water glass shattered in their hand. The noise brought everyone running. But of course, the hall was empty. Empty except for the locked door, silent and waiting. Later, when the house had quieted again, the father dared to test something. He lit a candle and set it in the hall. The flame burned steady, but the shadows didn't behave. Instead of one shadow, the candle cast 3, each bent in a different direction, writhing as if alive. He blew out the flame immediately, but the shadows lingered for several seconds afterward, before dissolving. Here's another impossible story, one told by a boy who delivered groceries decades ago. He claimed he carried a basket to the kitchen and glanced up to see a shadow sitting at the table. Just a shadow, no body, no features, just darkness shaped like a man. When he blinked, it was gone, but the chair was still warm when he touched it. The family began avoiding the hall at night. They crowded together in one room, bringing blankets and pillows, turning the living room into a makeshift camp. But walls don't keep shadows out. Sometimes, in the flicker of the TV, they saw figures crouching at the edges of the room. Sometimes, in the soft glow of the nightlight, they saw hands stretching along the floor, fingers too long, curling toward them. The weirdest detail yet came one stormy evening. Rain lashed the windows, thunder boomed, and the power went out. In the blackness, the youngest child whispered, "Why are there so many people here?" The parents shushed them, terrified, but the child insisted, "They're standing in the corners. They're watching us breathe." No one dared strike a match. And here's the third impossible story. An old priest, long retired, once claimed he visited the house in his youth. He said he saw shadows filling the hall, dozens of them, and when he recited prayers, they laughed, not with voices, but with a rustling sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. He fled before finishing a single verse, later telling people that the house was not haunted by the dead, but by things that never lived at all. Can you guys get out of this? Or are you already walking side by side with these shadows? By the end of the week, the family learned one terrible truth. The house didn't just contain shadows, the house made them. and once it made a shadow in your shape, it no longer needed you to cast it. By now, the house had stopped feeling like a home. It was a stage, and the family were actors forced to perform in a script they hadn't rehearsed for. Every corner held tension. Every shadow seemed pregnant with menace. And that's when the dreams began, dreams that weren't quite dreams at all. The first nightmare arrived on the 5th night. It came to the mother. She fell asleep in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, exhaustion finally dragging her down. But instead of rest, her mind opened to a scene both vivid and suffocating. She found herself standing in the hallway upstairs, facing the locked door. The knob turned slowly on its own, metal squealing. And then the door opened, not into a room, but into darkness. Pure, endless void. From within, a woman in black stepped forward, her veil obscuring her face, her voice a whisper like silk tearing. She said only one thing: "Leave while you can." The mother jolted awake, gasping, clutching her chest. The room was quiet, too quiet, but when she looked down, the blanket on her lap was covered in dust as if she'd been lying in the attic, not the living room. Meanwhile, the father dreamed differently. He wandered the house, alone, his footsteps echoing in endless corridors. The walls shifted like a maze, stretching, narrowing, leading him always back to the same place, the locked door, and behind it, the same scratching, louder now, almost impatient. When he reached to touch the knob, a hand shot out from the wood itself, grey, bony fingers wrapping around his wrist. He woke screaming, his arm aching as if truly gripped. Here's the first impossible story tied to the nightmares. A tenant once confessed that every dream he had in the house ended the same way with him, standing in the front yard, staring at the windows, and in every window, he saw himself, dozens of reflections, each one a little different, a little wrong. Sometimes they smiled when he didn't. Sometimes they waved. Sometimes they pressed their palms against the glass, begging silently. He moved out within a week. The eldest child's nightmare was subtler but no less disturbing. They dreamed of eating dinner at the kitchen table with the family. Only, when they looked up, no one had faces. Just smooth skin where eyes and mouths should be. The food on their plates crawled with worms, and when they tried to scream, the faceless figures turned their heads in perfect unison, raising spoons to point at the child like accusing fingers. They woke choking on their own breath, the weird detail that came in real life. Each morning after these nightmares, the beds were damp not with sweat, but with something sticky, smelling faintly of iron. The family stripped the sheets, washed them, but the stains always returned by dawn. The youngest child's nightmare might have been the worst. They dreamed of a playroom filled with toys, bright and cheerful, but the toys began to move on their own. Dolls blinked, stuffed animals grinned with too many teeth, a rocking horse creaked back and forth, faster and faster, until it bucked violently. In the corner sat the woman in black, the same figure from the mother's dream, humming a lullaby. The child asked who she was. She lifted her veil, revealing a face pale as bone, eyes hollow sockets filled with writhing shadows. The child woke screaming so loudly the neighbors heard through the walls. Another impossible story, woven into the town's history, said that dreams in the house weren't just dreams, they were rehearsals. One farmer swore he dreamed of drowning in the well behind the property. Days later, while inspecting it, he slipped, cracked his skull, and died in the water. Locals said the house had shown him the script ahead of time, and he hadn't listened. The family, rattled and drained, tried to convince themselves it was stress. New house, old wood, creaky floors. The brain plays tricks when you're tired, but denial only goes so far. Each nightmare carried too much detail, too much weight to dismiss as imagination. The weirdest real-life incident came one morning. The father woke with soil under his fingernails, thick, black soil, damp and clinging. He hadn't been outside. None of them had, yet his hands were filthy, as if he'd spent hours digging. He scrubbed them raw, but the smell lingered, earthy, rotten, like freshly opened graves. Here's the third impossible story of this chapter. An old woman in town once described the same dream the mother had, the woman in black, warning her to leave. But she added a detail the mother hadn't shared. The woman always stands in front of the locked door, blocking it with her body. The old woman claimed she was protecting people, not threatening them. But she also said the moment anyone ignored the warning, the house claimed another shadow. Can you guys get out of this? Or are you already trapped in dreams that don't belong to you? By the end of the week, the family understood something terrifying. The house didn't just haunt their waking hours, it followed them into their sleep, bending dreams into traps, weaving nightmares into prophecies. And once the house has access to your dreams, it never lets go. The sixth night in the cursed house brought no rest. After the storm of nightmares, the family moved through the halls with haunted eyes, whispering instead of speaking, afraid to disturb the silence that clung like cobwebs. But silence never lasted long in this place. It only waited. It was the eldest child who stumbled on the first physical clue. While pacing the upstairs hallway, trying to shake off the memory of faceless dreams, they felt a loose board underfoot. It gave a low groan, like something buried beneath. Driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, they pried the plank open. Dust puffed into the air, thick and choking. Inside the cavity lay a book, old and brittle. Its leather cover cracked like dried skin. The diary, the pages were yellow, edges curling as though scorched by unseen fire. Ink bled through, jagged and desperate, like the hand of someone writing in a fever. The first line chilled them instantly. To anyone who finds this, the house is alive. Do not trust its silence. It feeds. The family gathered in the dim light of a single lamp, flipping through the diary together. Each entry spiraled further into madness. The writer, a tenant from decades earlier, described nights of whispers, footsteps in empty rooms, shadows that learned to mimic his shape. He wrote of the woman in black, appearing in dreams, always near the locked door. At first, she warned him. Later, she stood behind him. Then, finally, she smiled. One passage stood out, written in shaky lines that dug into the paper so hard they nearly tore through. The house shows you what it wants. It does not haunt it. Every nightmare is a rehearsal of how you will die here. I see my own end in every dream. I write this with trembling hands, knowing the house watches even now. When I sleep tonight, I will not wake. The entry ended abruptly. The rest of the pages were smeared with stains, dark, rust-colored, too old to confirm but too suggestive to deny. Blood. Here's the first impossible story tied to the diary. A historian in town once examined the house records. He confirmed that multiple families reported finding diaries hidden in the floorboards, each one written by a different hand, decades apart. Yet all of them repeated the same warnings, the same phrases, the same handwriting style, as if the house itself was rewriting through different tenants, using them as its pen. The family, trembling, kept reading. Another entry described the locked upstairs room in detail. The writer had tried everything to force it open: hammers, axes, even fire. Nothing worked, but in his dreams, the door always swung wide, leading him into visions of endless corridors, each one lined with mirrors, reflecting him 1,000 times. The last words before the bloodstains began: behind the door is not a room, it is the mouth, and the mouth must be fed. The second impossible story. A contractor once hired to renovate the house swore. He tore down the wall containing the locked door. Behind it, there was nothing, just empty framework. But the moment he turned away, he heard the knob rattling. When he looked back, the door had returned, solid, unchanged. Waiting. The youngest child grew pale while listening to the diary. They whispered that the friend they'd been playing with in their room told them never to read the book aloud, because it makes the house angry. The family froze. No one had ever mentioned the diary to the child before. That same night, the diary proved its weight in terror. While the family slept, the book left closed on the table, flipped its own pages, windless, soundless, as if unseen fingers caressed it. By dawn, it lay open to a fresh page, a new entry, written in the same fevered hand. The words were clear. You should not have read. Now the house will choose. The third impossible story. A visitor once reported hearing scratching in the walls at night. When he followed the sound, it led him to a crawl space. Inside, he found not rats, not insects, but dozens of pages loose, torn diary scraps written in languages he didn't know. He swore the pages whispered when touched, like children reciting prayers. The family stared at the new entry with hollow eyes. None of them had touched the pen. None of them had written those words. And yet, the ink was still wet. The diary wasn't just a record. It was a conversation, a message written not by the past, but by the house itself, and the house had just answered them. The family tried to pretend life could still be normal, even inside a house that wrote in its own diary. Dinner seemed the safest ritual food, light, warmth, and all of them gathered in one room. But in cursed houses, rituals are invitations. They set the table with trembling hands. The youngest hummed softly, nervously stacking forks. The parents forced small smiles, whispering that they should act calm, act human, as if the house might leave them alone if they behaved like a family. But the air was colder than usual, as though invisible lungs exhaled around them. The chandelier's light flickered not in rhythm, but like a heartbeat. At first, it was almost comical. A spoon clinked against the floor by itself, rolling lazily under the table. They laughed, nervously. Gravity, coincidence, clumsy hands. But when a plate spun across the table like a coin, shattering against the wall, laughter died. The mother tried to gather the shards, but the pieces twitched away from her fingers, scattering like frightened insects. And then, all at once, every dish on the table cracked down the middle with a sharp chorus of snaps. Food spilled across the wood. Wine ran in rivulets, thick and red, pooling into the shape of something that looked disturbingly like a handprint. The impossible story begins here. Back in the 1960s, one tenant described the same dinner phenomenon: plates breaking by themselves, wine staining the floor in perfect shapes. But in her version, the shapes were not hands. They were faces, screaming, pressed flat against the wood. She never ate in that room again. That night, the family pushed their chairs back slowly, no one daring to speak. Then the wind came, though every window was locked. It swirled through the dining room like a predator circling prey. The chandelier swung violently, throwing monstrous shadows across the walls. And in one of those shadows, they saw her again, the woman in black. She stood behind the father, her head tilted, her veil dripping darkness like liquid smoke. When he spun around, she was gone, but the smell remained a sweet, rotting perfume. The second impossible story connects here. A delivery man, decades earlier, swore he stepped into the dining room for only a moment. He saw a woman seated at the head of the table, wearing a black veil. He apologized, thinking she was the owner. But when he blinked, she vanished, leaving the chair rocking slightly, as though she'd just risen. The family regrouped, shaken. The children refused to touch the food, whispering that it tasted wrong. They swore the meat bled when they cut into it, even though it had been cooked. And the bread freshly baked hours before now smelled like damp earth. The father, desperate to prove sanity still existed, bit into a piece. He gagged, his mouth filled with the metallic temps of rust, as if chewing iron. That was when the whispers began. Not in the hall this time, but right there in the dining room, curling beneath the table. They rose like steam, muttering in languages the family didn't know, but somehow understood. A single phrase stood out, clear as a knife: the house must be fed. The mother dropped her glass. It didn't break. It dissolved. The stem melted into dust, leaving a faint ring of ash on the table. And then came the third impossible story. A priest once performed a blessing in that dining room. As he spoke his prayer, the table shuddered, and every candle snuffed out. He later confessed he'd seen his own reflection in the wineglass not as he was, but as a corpse, eyes black, skin grey. He left without finishing the ritual, muttering that no god listened inside those walls. The family fled the room, leaving food and shards behind. As they shut the door, they heard one last sound from inside: chairs scraping, plates sliding, silverware clinking, as though unseen guests had taken their places, continuing the meal without them. They didn't speak of it that night. They simply huddled together, listening to the house breathe. But deep down, they all knew one thing: dinner had not been ruined. Dinner had been served. The days blurred, but the nights sharpened like knives. After the dining room's performance, the family decided not to eat together anymore. Meals became quiet, scattered affairs, each person hiding in a different corner of the house. But no one noticed how much time the youngest child was spending alone. Alone, or so it seemed. It began innocently. The child whispered to corners, giggled at empty air, asked for an extra glass of juice for my friend. At first, the parents smiled weakly, convincing themselves it was imagination, a child's way of coping. But the more they ignored it, the clearer the conversations became. Sometimes, they heard two voices, one high and sweet, the other low, rasping, like leaves dragged across stone. One afternoon, the mother caught the child kneeling in the hallway, holding what looked like a tea party. Plastic cups were arranged in a circle, one tilted toward an empty chair. The child smiled brightly, saying, "She likes her tea cold. She doesn't drink it hot anymore." The mother's blood ran cold. Who doesn't? The answer: the lady. She lives upstairs. She told me the diary makes you sad. The family hadn't spoken to the child about the diary. They hadn't even let them see it. Yet somehow, their friend knew. The first impossible story connects here. In the early 1900s, a boy named Elias supposedly lived in the house. His letter, still archived at the local library, described a tall woman with a veil who visited his room at night, telling him secrets about his family's deaths before they happened. Weeks later, those deaths came true, exactly as described. Elias disappeared soon after. The letters ended mid-sentence. The current child's behavior grew stranger. Their drawings changed from bright stick figures to smeared shapes in black crayon, always a tall woman with no face. Sometimes, the paper was clawed, as if small fingernails had dug through it. One evening, the father walked past the child's room and heard singing. Not nursery rhymes. A low, mournful tune, vibrating through the floorboards. He pushed the door open and froze. The child sat facing the closet, singing softly in harmony with another voice, a second voice that came from inside the closet itself. When he flicked on the light, the singing stopped. The closet was empty. The second impossible story adds weight. A babysitter once reported hearing children laughing in the upstairs hallway while she was alone with the kids downstairs. She ran up, but the hallway was empty. Later, she found the children's toys neatly arranged in a perfect circle, as though waiting for playmates. None of the children admitted to doing it. The youngest child grew defiant. They refused to leave the house, even when the rest of the family begged to spend nights at her relatives'. "She'll be lonely if I leave," they said. "She chose me. She doesn't like anyone else." One night, the parents woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, tiny footsteps, but not quite right. They were too slow, too deliberate. The father rushed to the child's room. The bed was empty. Panic rose. They searched the halls, calling out in frantic whispers. They found the child standing in front of the locked door upstairs, the one that had refused to open since the day they arrived. The child's small hand rested on the knob. Their lips moved as if listening. When the parents pulled them away, the child screamed, not like a child, but like something much older, deeper, echoing through the house. The third impossible story is eerily similar. In the 1980s, another family's daughter vanished for 3 days inside the house. When she reappeared, she stood calmly at the bottom of the stairs, saying she had been with her friend behind the door. Doctors found no sign of malnutrition or dehydration, as if the house itself had kept her alive. She refused to explain further, and later lost her voice permanently. Back in the present, the youngest fell silent after that night, refusing to speak to anyone but the unseen friend. When asked who the friend was, they whispered one sentence that froze every adult in the house. "She told me the house is almost ready." The house had grown bolder. It no longer confined its whispers to the night. Even in daylight, the air carried the weight of something watching, something pressing against the walls as if eager to step through. The family tried to ignore it until the walls themselves began to bleed. It started in the upstairs hallway, near the locked door. A thin red line seeped from a crack in the plaster, winding downward like a tear. At first, they thought it was rusted pipewater, but the metallic smell was undeniable. Iron, copper, blood. The father wiped at it with his handkerchief, gagging as the liquid smeared thick and sticky across the fabric. When he returned moments later with bleach and cloths, the stain was gone, vanished, as if swallowed by the wall. Only the smell lingered, stronger than before. That night, more streaks appeared. In the living room, in the kitchen, even across the ceiling above their beds. The youngest child laughed softly, pointing upward. "She's painting," they said, as rivulets dripped onto the carpet like crimson rain. Here lies the first impossible story. Back in 1927, a group of men tried converting the house into a boarding school. They reported entire walls dripping with blood in front of dozens of witnesses. Samples were collected and tested. Results: human origin, type O, yet none of the residents at that time matched the type. The school closed within a month. The family scrambled to cover the stains, wallpaper, paint, anything to hide the growing evidence. But every attempt failed. Fresh paint bubbled and peeled within hours, revealing new red streaks beneath. At one point, they pressed their ears to the walls and swore they could hear a pulse, slow, steady, like a heartbeat behind plaster. The second impossible story echoes this. A priest claimed he once heard the house itself breathing through its walls during a midnight blessing. He said it exhaled hot air, reeking of rot, and he left convinced he'd been standing inside the chest cavity of something enormous. One evening, the mother caught sight of something worse than the stains: letters, words, scrawled in dripping red across the wall near the dining room, "Leave or feed." She screamed for the others. But by the time they arrived, the wall was blank again, pristine. They doubted her eyes, doubted her mind, but she knew. The house had written its demand. The youngest child, watching with wide.com eyes, whispered, "She doesn't want us all, just one." Then it stops. The father snapped, shaking the child by the shoulders, begging to know who she was. The child only smiled, a strange, vacant smile that did not belong on such a small face. The third impossible story seals the horror. In the 1970s, a man swore the walls bled only in the presence of his youngest son. When he locked the boy outside the house, the bleeding ceased instantly. But when he let the boy back in, it started again, worse than before. The man fled without the child. Locals whispered that the house kept the boy in the cursed present. The family huddled together in the living room, afraid to touch the walls, afraid even to lean against them. The smell of iron filled every corner. Every shadow seemed to pulse with red dot. And then, with a slow groan, the walls began to seep again, thicker this time. Not just streaks but floods, spreading downward like grasping fingers. Pools formed on the floor. The house was not warning them anymore. It was feeding. The parents dragged their children away, their feet splashing through the crimson flood. Upstairs, the locked door rattled violently, as though something inside pounded to be let out. Some houses creak. This one pulsed, and no one could deny it. Now the house had veins. The locked door had always been there, lurking at the end of the upstairs hallway like a question the house refused to answer. For weeks, the family avoided it, too afraid to test what lay behind. But fear has a way of building pressure, and the bleeding walls had finally broken them. It happened just after midnight. The family lay awake, tense, listening to the steady thrum of the house. Then the sound began a rattling, faint at first, then louder, more violent. The knob of the locked door twisted, jerked, scraped. Someone or something was trying to come out. The father rushed forward, pounding his fists against the wood. "Stop," he shouted. The door answered by bursting open with a crack like thunder. The family froze at the threshold. Beyond the frame stretched, not the dusty guest room they expected, but a chamber untouched by time. The air smelled of mold and candle smoke. Dust hung like fog, and in the middle of the room stood a chair, a single wooden chair, perfectly upright, its seat stained dark. The walls inside were lined with drawings, hundreds of them, scratched in with nails, knives, or maybe bare fingers, shapes of people, faces with hollow eyes, stick figures bending as if in agony. The ceiling bore a single sentence etched over and over again: "The house is hungry." Here comes the first impossible story. A maintenance worker once claimed he entered the forbidden room during a storm. He swore it wasn't a room at all, but a forest. Trees grew from the floorboards, their bark dripping red. He fled and never returned, but when investigators checked, they found only the same dusty chamber. The family stepped inside, despite their better instincts. The youngest child skipped forward happily, as though returning to a familiar playground. They touched the stained chair with reverence, whispering, "This is where she sat." The parents pulled them back, hearts pounding. Then the shadows began to move. Not their own shadows, these bent the wrong way, curving upward across the ceiling, stretching too long, too thin. One shadow detached itself from the wall, slithering closer like smoke made solid. The second impossible story connects here. In 1954, a visitor reported stepping into the room and watching his own shadow detach from his body. It walked to the chair, sat down, and began rocking. He fled screaming, but swore afterward that he cast no shadow for 3 days. The family tried to flee the room, but the door slammed shut behind them with a sound like a scream. The walls groaned, and the etched words began to glow faintly, as though lit from beneath the plaster. Then came the sound of a woman's weeping, soft at first, then rising, filling the room. They spun in circles, searching for the source. The youngest child tilted their head and pointed upward. From the ceiling beams, a figure slowly unfurled. She wore black, her veil trailing down like a shroud, her body elongated, her limbs too thin, her face obscured. She hung there, swaying gently, sobbing into the silence. The third impossible story. A folklorist once recorded a local legend about the house, that every 100 years, the widow in black returns to claim a family. Her chosen victim is always the youngest, and she drags them behind the locked door, where no one follows. The legend never explained why, only that the house demanded it. The weeping grew unbearable. The walls shook, dust raining from the ceiling. The stained chair tipped over, legs snapping like bones. The father hurled himself at the door, clawing at the handle, screaming for it to open. At last, it did. They spilled into the hallway, gasping. The room behind them went silent, the air flattening as if nothing had happened. When they turned back, the door was closed, once again locked, just as it had been before. But they all knew the truth now. The forbidden room wasn't simply a part of the house, it was the house's throat, and it had just opened to taste them. After the night of the forbidden room, the house no longer hid its hunger. Every corner seemed to whisper, every wall seemed to breathe. The family tried to avoid the upstairs hallway entirely, but the house was clever. It pushed its grief into every space. It began with the sound of crying, at first faint, like wind slipping through cracks, then louder, fuller, unmistakably human. The sobbing rose and fell through the halls, pulling at their nerves until none of them could sleep. It was not a child's cry, nor the wail of an animal. It was the grief of a woman who had been mourning for centuries. One night, the sound led them back toward the stairs. Against every instinct, they followed. At the base of the attic steps, the sobbing became almost unbearable, echoing as though the entire house wept. The air smelled of mildew, roses, and rot. The figure appeared there for the first time, fully visible. No tricks of shadow. The woman in black. She stood at the foot of the attic ladder, her veil fluttering as if moved by a wind no one else could feel. Her face was hidden, but her posture bent with sorrow, her shoulders shaking as she cried into her hands. The youngest child whispered, "She's sad because we don't understand." The mother demanded, "Understand what?" The answer came not from the child, but from the apparition itself. The weeping broke into words, faint and quivering. "The house must eat." The first impossible story mirrors this encounter. A group of paranormal investigators once recorded an EVP session in the attic of the house. The audio captured a woman's voice sobbing, followed by the words, "Feed me or stay." Their equipment shut down moments later, batteries drained as though consumed. The figure drifted closer, her veil brushing the father's arm. He staggered backward, his skin frosting white with sudden cold. She raised one long, trembling finger, pointing toward the attic hatch above them. Then she dissolved into dust, her lament echoing long after she vanished. The second impossible story ties to the attic itself. A previous owner reported climbing up there after hearing crying for weeks. He found nothing but dust and boxes, yet every box lid bore scratch marks inside, as though someone had clawed to get out. The owner moved out the next morning, abandoning all his belongings. The family debated what to do. Ignore her, obey her. The father insisted they leave the house for good, but the door wouldn't budge. Every window was nailed shut by unseen hands. The house itself had sealed them in. That night, the lament grew unbearable. The walls shook with grief, pictures rattling off their hooks. The sound came not from one place but everywhere at once, like the entire structure was crying. The youngest child sat calmly through it all, clutching their stuffed animal. "She's not bad," they said softly. "She's just lonely. She wants us to stay. She picked me because I listen." The parents broke down in tears, exhausted, terrified, but powerless. How do you fight a house that bleeds, weeps, and chooses? The third impossible story haunts this truth. In the late 1800s, a farmer's wife claimed she saw the woman in black in her dreams, crying for days on end. On the final night, the dream changed. The woman stopped weeping and began laughing. When the wife woke, her husband and children were gone. Their bodies were never found. Only their shoes remained neatly lined at the attic stairs. Back in the cursed present. The family stared up at the attic hatch, knowing that was where the lament led. The father gripped the ladder, trembling. The mother clutched the children, praying under her breath. Above them, the sobbing quieted. A silence heavier than any sound fell over the house. Then, a single voice, sharp and clear, rang down the ladder. "Come and see." The attic hatch hung above them like a mouth waiting to swallow. The father's hand trembled as he pulled the cord, and the wooden ladder creaked down, each rung groaning as though it knew the weight it would soon bear. Dust sifted from above, filling the air with the smell of wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic. The family hesitated. The sobbing had stopped, but silence in the house was worse. It meant the woman was waiting. The father muttered, "If we don't face it, we'll never leave." He climbed the first rung, then the second, his body stiff with fear. His wife clutched the children close, whispering prayers too fast to understand. When his head breached the attic floor, the air changed. It was colder than ice, yet still carried the sick sweetness of roses long dead. The attic stretched wider than the house itself should have allowed, an impossible space filled with shadow. Moonlight poured through cracks in the roof, but where it touched, nothing lit up. It was as though the beams were swallowed. In the center of the attic lay a circle of broken toys, shoes, and tiny chairs, objects belonging to children of different eras. At the circle's heart stood a rocking chair, rocking slowly, though no one sat in it. Then he saw her. The woman in black stood behind the chair, her veil gone, her face pale and gaunt. Her eyes were not eyes at all, but empty sockets weeping black tears. She raised her hand, pointing again, this time at the circle. The first impossible story tied to that circle. Decades ago, workers repairing the roof found a ring of shoes hidden beneath the boards. Each pair belonged to a child who had lived in the house. None of those children ever grew old within its walls. The father felt his knees weaken, but he stepped forward. The rocking chair creaked louder, then tipped backward with a violent jolt, throwing itself to the ground. From beneath it, something small and brittle spilled out, a child's skull, no larger than an apple. Its jaw cracked open in a silent scream. The mother screamed from below, "What do you see?" He couldn't answer. His mouth had gone dry. The second impossible story explains why. In the early 1900s, a tenant had reported hearing tiny bones clattering in the attic whenever the wind howled. He never went up himself, but he claimed his dog would sit at the bottom of the ladder and bark for hours, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the hatch. Back in the cursed present. The woman drifted closer, her black tears streaked down her hollow cheeks, dripping onto the circle of toys. Wherever a tear fell, the toy twitched. A doll's head turned, a tin soldier's arm lifted, a jack-in-a-box cranked open by itself. The attic pulsed with life stolen from grief. The father whispered, "What do you want from us?" Her lips parted, and for the first time they could see her mouth. It was jagged, torn wider than any human smile should stretch. Her words came in a hiss, yet every syllable pressed into their skulls. Stay, feed, become. The toys rattled violently, the circle shaking as though the attic itself were preparing to consume him. His wife screamed again, "Get down, please, get down." But he couldn't move. The house had chosen its moment. His body bent forward, pulled by something stronger than muscle or will. He teetered at the edge of the circle. Then, suddenly, the youngest child's voice rang out, calm, soft, but stronger than the house's pull. "She doesn't want Daddy. She wants me." The parents' blood froze. The third impossible story confirms their dread. In the 1950s, a young girl reportedly told her parents that the woman in black had adopted her. Days later, the girl disappeared. Her parents searched every inch of the attic, but all they found was her favorite stuffed bear sitting upright in the circle, its fur damp with tears. Back in the present, the woman in black turned toward the child below, her eyeless sockets widening, her jagged mouth stretched into something like a smile. The father finally broke free of the pull and scrambled back down the ladder, slamming the hatch shut, but the echo of the woman's hiss remained, crawling through their heads. The house must eat. The youngest child looked up at their terrified parents and whispered, almost with pity, "She's starving." The night after the attic revelation, the house no longer pretended to be quiet. It groaned with every breath, timbers flexing as if lungs expanded within the walls. The family huddled together in the living room, but no corner of the cursed structure was safe. The windows shook, panes rattling like teeth in a skull. The mother whispered, "It's alive." She wasn't wrong. The floorboards heaved upward in small waves beneath their feet. Wallpaper peeled in curling strips, revealing not wood, not plaster, but something fleshy, wet, pulsing. The ceiling dripped with condensation like sweat. The house had awakened fully. No longer content to haunt it, wanted to consume. The first impossible story described a night when neighbors swore they saw the house breathing. In the 1930s, a milkman delivering at dawn claimed he watched the curtains rise and fall as though lungs were hidden inside. He never delivered there again, telling people, "That house don't need people, it already is one." Back in the present, the father tried the front door, but the knob twisted into his hand, writhing like a snake. He screamed and flung it away, but his palm carried the imprint of teeth. Behind him, the children cried, clinging to their mother, "Can you guys get out of this alive?" I doubt it. The walls pulsed again, and this time a low rumble grew from deep within the foundation, like a growl. The chandelier overhead rattled, then dropped, shattering on the floor. Shards skittered across the boards, embedding themselves like claws. The second impossible story comes from a construction worker in 1978, hired to reinforce the basement. He said the foundation wasn't stone, it was cartilage, thick and fibrous. He quit on the spot, leaving his tools behind. Years later, his grandson returned to the site to look for those tools. He never came back out. The mother pulled the children toward the stairs, shouting, "We have to move, now." The steps moaned beneath their feet, but they ran anyway, taking refuge in one of the upstairs bedrooms. She shoved the dresser against the door, though the wood bent like clay under her palms. The house wasn't trying to keep them safe, it was savoring them. The father pressed his ear to the wall. Inside, he heard heartbeats. Not one, not two, but dozens, thumping in dissonant rhythms, overlapping like a hive. Each beat pushed through the wood with heat, as though blood pumped behind it. The third impossible story explains why that sound was so terrifying. In 1911, a priest performed a blessing here. He lasted 20 minutes before fleeing, face pale, robes soaked in sweat. His final words before leaving town forever: "That place has too many hearts, but none of them are God's." Back in the cursed present, the heartbeat thundered so loud the children covered their ears. The dresser toppled over, the door burst open, and the hallway literally stretched, elongating into a tunnel of endless wood. Doors lined either side, each one slamming open and shut, like mouths hungry for something warm. The family tried to run back, but the bedroom dissolved behind them, melting into the corridor of endless doors. They were trapped inside the belly of the awakened house. The father gripped his wife's hand, his voice steady though fear cracked his words. "It's forcing us to make a choice." The mother shook her head, clutching the children. "What choice?" The walls answered. A jagged whisper slithered through the hallway. "Stay, feed, become," and then the entire house shuddered, as though taking its first true step into being alive. The corridor of endless doors stretched before them, each one slamming open and shut, but none leading to freedom. The family stood frozen in the shifting hallway, the children pressed between their parents. The air thickened, vibrating with the house's heartbeat. It was no longer just a building, it was a beast waiting for its prey to surrender. The father whispered, "It wants us to decide." His words trembled, but he knew them to be true. The house had been patient, feeding for centuries, waiting for every family who dared to enter. Now it was forcing this one to choose who stayed and who left. The first impossible story reveals the price others had paid. In 1892, records show a widow and her 3 children moved into the house. Weeks later, neighbors saw only her leaving, hair turned white, skin thin as paper. She never spoke again, but scratched one phrase into every wall of her new cottage: "They eat what I could not protect." Back in the cursed present, the mother clutched her youngest close. "We're not giving it anyone," she hissed. "We leave together." But the house groaned at her defiance, the walls tightening inward like ribs, squeezing a chest. The children cried out as the floor tilted, forcing them to stumble forward toward one particular door at the corridor's end. The second, impossible story tells why that door was different. In 1965, a group of teenagers dared each other to break into the house. Only one came back, a boy who claimed his friends had opened the final door in the hallway upstairs. He swore he saw their bodies turn to ash before they even hit the ground. His hair never grew back after that night. His scalp burned as if from fire. The family reached the final door, its frame warped like a grin. The woman in black appeared again, her form taller, sharper, her eyeless sockets fixed on the children. She raised her skeletal hand and offered them the choice: "One stays, the rest may go." The father shouted, "No," and stepped forward. "Take me." The woman tilted her head, black tears streaming. Her jaw opened, jagged and wide, but she did not take him. Instead, she looked past him, Matt, the youngest child, who stared back with eerie calm. That the child whispered, "She doesn't want Daddy, she wants me." The parents screamed in unison, but the child continued, almost entranced. "If one of us stays, she'll let you go. But if none of us do, the house will eat all of us." The third impossible story echoes this moment. In 1947, an entire family of 6 was found inside the house, their bodies dried to husks. Yet one child's room upstairs was empty, bed neatly made, toys arranged as if waiting. No one ever saw that child again. but neighbors swore they heard her laughter echoing from the windows at night. Back in the cursed present, the woman in black stepped closer, lowering her torn mouth to the child's face. The parents clung to their little one, shaking, pleading, but the house rumbled, pressing the choice harder. The father's voice cracked, desperate. "There has to be another way. We won't trade our child." The whisper slithered again, cruel and final. "Stay, feed, become." The hallway shook violently, the doors slamming faster, the walls tightening. The family knew the truth. The bargain was real, and time was running out. The house trembled with hunger, every heartbeat echoing through the warped corridor. The woman in black loomed over them, her jagged mouth dripping black tears, her skeletal hand stretched toward the child. The family clung together, refusing to surrender. But the walls closed in tighter, groaning as though lungs collapsed around them. The father roared, "If you want blood, take me." He threw himself into the circle of shadow beneath the final door. For a moment the house paused, its heartbeats skipping. The woman in black turned her empty sockets toward him, her lips curled. Not quite a smile, not quite pity. But the house did not want him. It wanted innocence. The youngest child lifted a trembling hand and touched the woman's cold fingers. The moment they connected, the house stopped moving. Silence fell, thick and absolute, as though every heart inside the walls held its breath. The mother screamed, pulling the child back, but it was too late. Shadows coiled around the little one like smoke, wrapping them in a shroud. The woman in black lowered her torn mouth and whispered something only the child could hear. Then, with a sudden gust of freezing wind, both vanished into the door. The corridor dissolved. The walls melted back into wood. The doors shrank into ordinary frames. The family found themselves back in the foyer, the front door swinging open as if nothing had ever been locked. The air outside was cold, but it was the clean cold of night, not the suffocating breath of the cursed house. The father staggered toward the open door, holding his wife's hand. Behind them, the house stood still and silent, its windows blank. Yet, from the attic, faint laughter echoed, high and childlike. Carried on the wind, the parents wept as they crossed the threshold, the price of survival etched into their souls forever. The house had eaten, the bargain was fulfilled, and it waited, patient as always, for the next family to arrive. Now, let's slow everything down. The story is finished, the screams are fading, and all that remains is the stillness after terror has passed. Imagine the cursed house far away, its windows dark, its shadows sealed away in another time, another place. You are safe here, far from its reach. Breathe deeply, in and out. Let the last images dissolve like smoke in the air. The creaks of the floorboards, the whispers in the walls, the eyeless stare of the woman in black, they are only pieces of a story now, drifting further and further away. Picture instead a quiet room, your room. The lights are low, the fan hums softly in the background, and the air is calm, steady, gentle. Outside the window, night has wrapped the world in a blanket of peace. Stars flicker far above, not haunting, but guiding, like tiny guardians watching from a distance. Every breath you take draws you further from the house, further from its hunger, until it becomes only a memory at the edge of your mind. You are not inside its walls. You are here, wrapped in your own safety, your own stillness, your own peace. If fear lingers, let it soften, let it fade. Fear is only a visitor, it cannot stay. Only comfort remains now, only rest. Close your eyes, if they are not already closed. Let the weight of your body sink into the bed, every muscle easing, every thought slowing. You are drifting, gently, into the quiet beyond stories. The house is gone, the curse is gone. Only the night remains calm and endless, holding you softly. Sleep well, dream gently. Good night. Script end. Good night.